Let's next take a look at ovulation charts offered on MyFertilityCharts.com. When you click on the ovulation charts link from the main menu, you'll be taken to a page similar to this. This page includes lots of information. At the top, you'll find cycle highlights. This will be followed by the ovulation chart itself, and then additional information including calculated ovulation dates, some chart display options, and also some chart library information. We'll discuss each of these separately. First, let's talk about loading ovulation charts in general. There are two methods to load an ovulation chart. The first is to simply click on a date on the mini calendar in the upper right corner of the page. The date that you click on will be the first date that shows up in the chart. For example, if you chose to click on March 21st, which is the first day of a cycle, then that chart will be loaded with that cycle starting at the very beginning of that chart. You may wish to load a chart for a different day though, so perhaps you're interested in clicking on March 29th instead. This would load the same cycle, but the chart would start already 1 week into that cycle. So the first date that you would see on your chart would actually be March 28th. You can use this calendar to specify a chart and load it with any start date. The second method may be more convenient for many users, focuses just on the recorded cycles that you have. You can use this drop-down box to look at all cycles which you've entered into the system and then quickly pick a cycle start date. So for example here, you can see that the choice has already been made for the March 21st cycle. This will load an ovulation chart starting on March 21st. Which would be the same thing that you would have gotten had you clicked on March 21st on the calendar. There are many links in and around the ovulation chart itself which are of interest. First, you may be interested in recording cycle notes. Cycle notes are notes that are associated with the specific cycle. If you want to modify or add these notes, you can push the Edit Notes button above the chart to go ahead and enter them. There are also links to jump to the previous cycle or to the next cycle. These appear immediately above the chart itself. Down below the chart, you will find a link on the far left to link your chart to the Fertility Exchange. This makes it possible for you to post your chart on the internal message boards so that other users can see it. The middle link here, Attach Chart to Public Message Boards, makes it possible for you to post your chart on the public message board so that other users can access it. When you click on this, you'll be taken to another page with additional instructions. This is also a useful button to click on if you're interested in posting your chart on another site. So perhaps you want to share your chart with users on a site other than MyFertilityCharts.com. By clicking on this link, you will receive instructions on how to go about doing that. Lastly, on the far right is a link that says Plot Temperature Data against other cycles. You can click on this button to take the existing chart that you're looking at and to use that temperature data to plot against other cycles. This is particularly useful when you're viewing other users' charts and you're interested in taking that other user's data and doing a temperature overlay against your own cycles. When you're reading ovulation charts, there are several different types of information which are displayed. We'll briefly look at a few of them. At the top is a temperature plot. This is where your individual temperature readings are plotted and connected, and ovulation is detected based upon that. There are other symptoms which appear in the middle portion of the chart, which are followed then by the dates. Each column on the chart represents a different date that are sequentially itemized going from left to right. And then down below you'll find recorded events. Depending on your chart display options, the recorded events may or may not be shown. These will highlight each individual event which you've recorded during the active cycle. Some other things worth mentioning about the ovulation charts. The overall calculated ovulation date is highlighted by selecting that column with a bold rectangle. So you can see here this bold black rectangle highlighting May 4th. This means that the overall ovulation date calculated based on all recorded symptoms has been determined to be May 4th. The number of days past ovulation based upon this calculation is shown at the top of the chart and is numbered from left to right. In the temperature grid, if the temperature data has indicated when ovulation occurs based upon the input temperature readings, the basal body temperature ovulation date will be highlighted using the red crosshairs shown here. Cervical mucus ovulation is also indicated using an X across that field in the period and mucus row. If you've recorded intercourse on some of the days on that chart, you can see that on your overall fertility chart by looking at the day of cycle. If that day is circled, then that tells you that intercourse was recorded on that date. Lastly, down at the bottom, you'll see a key which tells you about different shading options which have been applied to individual symptoms. You'll notice that the darker purple is indicative of higher levels of fertility. The lighter color, which approaches white, tells you that those days are not highly fertile. So looking at a given symptom, you can look at your temperature data, for example, and you'll see early on in your cycle the shading is very low, indicating very low fertility levels. Around the middle of the cycle, it starts to ramp up though, and you see much darker shading. This tells you that you're much more fertile during this period, which is in and around ovulation. After ovulation ends, though, according to the basal body temperature method, which ends right here where the crosshair is shown on this date, then your overall fertility drops off quickly. And you see that in the shading, that the overall shading here is not really present, and most of the cells are white. You can use this information on each individual symptom to understand when that symptom points towards ovulation and fertility. So for example, by looking at the saliva ferning field, you can see that it tends to be darkest over a little bit later than the basal body temperatures. So it thinks that ovulation and higher levels of fertility would be a little bit later in the cycle. Period and mucus, though, tends to be darkest right around the same time as the overall ovulation date and also as the basal body temperature shading. By using the shading information shown on the charts, you can tell when you are most fertile based on the individual symptoms. This is extremely useful since you can understand which symptoms are leading to a specific ovulation date, and more importantly, when the fertility levels are highest based upon the different symptoms. Some other notes about reading your ovulation charts. It's possible to hover your mouse over the chart and get additional information about things that you've recorded, specifically temperature notes, intercourse notes, and personal notes. To access temperature notes, simply hover your mouse over the temperature grid. Depending on which column you're on, that will correspond to a given date. If you highlight a very specific column, such as here, cycle day 8 in this cycle, and you hover your mouse